What defines our immigration decisions? Is it fear, practicality, or is it about people, values, and the kind of world we want to create? These questions aren't just theoretical, they're personal, urgent, and transformative, and we are here to help you understand them. This channel, Creative Immigration Law, explores immigration from a unique perspective, combining philosophy, ethics, and over 14 years observing and assisting with immigration. There are different forces that drive immigration, people's reactions, and policy itself. But their outcomes are all deeply intertwined. Until we learn to bring these together with common understanding and common purpose, the result is fragmentation and discord. So to begin, imagine this. A family fleeing violence arrives at a border. They've walked for weeks, carrying little but their hope. They knock at the gates of a new land, exhausted and afraid, seeking refuge. How do we respond? What values shape our reactions? What are the costs of inconsistency, both morally and practically? I'm not going to tell you how to answer these questions. Everyone has to come to their own answers. But by the end, I hope to have provided you some of the tools to do so. So today we'll examine one perspective that might help. Let us examine the teachings of Jesus to uncover how his message of love and justice can guide us toward the future. Immigration is not just a political issue, it's a profoundly human one. It's about people, real people, seeking safety, opportunity, and dignity. And our response reveals not just our policies, but our humanity. Jesus' teachings offer a lens to approach immigration with both heart and clarity. His words challenge us to see beyond politics and pragmatism, urging us to consider the moral and spiritual dimensions of welcoming the stranger. Immigration is not just about policies or borders, it's about how individuals, communities, and governments respond to vulnerability. At the center of this issue is the migrant, the vulnerable person seeking refuge, safety, or opportunity. The migrant is often a stranger in a foreign land, dependent on the compassion and choices of others. Their need reminds us of the shared humanity that binds us all, regardless of where we come from. Then there is the host community. This is the collective group or nation faced with the responsibility of responding to the migrant. Balancing compassion with social stability is no small task, and host communities often grapple with fear, resource constraints, and questions of identity. Yet they also have the power to extend welcome and create systems that reflect their values. Finally, we have the moral imperative. This is the divine call to love, justice, and shared humanity that underpins all our actions. Jesus' teachings compel us to see every person, especially the most vulnerable, as deserving of dignity and care. This moral vision transcends borders and challenges us to rise above fear and indifference. Today we'll explore how these three elements, the migrant, the host community, and the moral imperative, interact, drawing on Jesus' teachings and real-world examples to envision what a truly compassionate approach to immigration could look like. Let's begin with one of Jesus' most powerful teachings on welcoming the stranger. In Matthew 25, verses 35 to 40, he says, "I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." In this passage, Jesus doesn't just ask us to show kindness, he identifies with the stranger. He reminds us that to welcome the migrant is to recognize our shared humanity, and to reject them is to reject him. Consider the story of Alan Kurdi, the Syrian boy whose lifeless body washed ashore in 2015, a haunting image of the refugee crisis. His family fled unimaginable violence, seeking safety in Europe, but their journey ended in tragedy. Alan's story pierced the world's conscience, sparking a wave of compassion and a backlash of fear. This tension reflects the relationship between the migrant and the host community. The host community's response determines whether the moral imperative of shared humanity is upheld. If the host community fails to welcome the migrant, it undermines the moral imperative of love and justice. Conversely, when the host embraces the stranger, they affirm both the dignity of the migrant and their own moral foundation. Policies that uphold coexistence might include pathways to asylum, programs for integration, and public messaging that humanizes migrants rather than demonizes them. Community organizations and churches often step in where governments fall short, embodying the spirit of Matthew 25. Jesus didn't just call for empathy, he called for action. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, a man beaten and left for dead is ignored by a priest and a Levite, respected members of society. It is the Samaritan, a marginalized outsider, who stops to help. The Samaritan didn't just feel compassion, he acted on it. He provided first aid, transported the injured man to safety, and paid for his care, all practical steps to meet an urgent need. This is the moral imperative in motion, as the Samaritan bridges the gap between the vulnerable and a compassionate individual within the host community. Think about sanctuary cities in the United States, where local governments refuse to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement to protect undocumented immigrants. Critics argue these policies undermine the law, but supporters see them as a modern Good Samaritan act. Practical steps to ensure vulnerable migrants are treated with dignity and not subjected to unnecessary harm. Similarly, grassroots organizations like Refugees Welcome International coordinate efforts to house asylum seekers with local families, creating direct person-to-person connections. These initiatives embody Jesus' vision of love as active and practical. Compassion is not abstract. It is lived out through tangible actions. When communities and individuals within the host group act to support migrants, they strengthen the moral imperative, creating networks of trust and shared responsibility. From hosting migrants to advocating for humane policies, Jesus' teachings invite us to ask, what is my role in creating practical solutions? For governments, this might look like expanding refugee resettlement programs. For communities, it might mean providing language classes, job training, or simply creating spaces of welcome. As we continue, let's reflect on the question, what does fairness look like in how we treat migrants? Consider the Golden Rule, one of Jesus' most universally recognized teachings. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This principle asks us to imagine ourselves in the shoes of others. It challenges us to treat people, especially those in need, as we would hope to be treated in their place. When we consider immigration through this lens, the moral responsibility becomes clear. The way we treat migrants reflects the values we want to live by as individuals and as a society. Let's think about this in a real-world context. Imagine you are forced to leave everything behind, your home, your family, your language, because of violence or poverty. You arrive in a new country with nothing, hoping for safety and a chance to rebuild. What kind of welcome would you hope for? Now think about what happens when that hope is denied. Migrants are turned away at borders or detained in overcrowded facilities. Children are separated from their parents, their cries ignored in the name of law and order. How would we feel if this were us? The Syrian refugee crisis offers a powerful illustration of this principle in action or inaction. In the face of war, millions of Syrians fled their homes, seeking asylum in neighboring countries and beyond. While some nations like Germany opened their doors, others erected barriers, both physical and bureaucratic. Those who welcomed refugees demonstrated the moral imperative of the Golden Rule, showing the world what it means to treat others as we would want to be treated. This principle isn't abstract, it has practical implications for policy. For example, fair asylum processes, humane detention practices, and family reunification programs are all ways to honor the Golden Rule. These actions acknowledge the humanity of migrants and create a culture of dignity and justice. But it's not just about government policy. As individuals, the Golden Rule invites us to take personal responsibility. Whether through volunteering, advocating, or simply standing in solidarity, each of us can help create a society that lives up to the values we claim to hold. Nonlinear effects, the ripple effect of love. Now let's move to another key insight from Jesus' teachings, the idea that love, when acted upon, creates ripple effects far beyond the initial act. In Luke 14:13-14, Jesus says, "When you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed." This teaching challenges the transactional nature of most human relationships. Jesus invites us to act selflessly, to extend love and care without expecting anything in return. And yet, paradoxically, this selflessness leads to blessings, not just for the recipient, but for the giver and the community as a whole. This is especially relevant in the context of immigration. Welcoming migrants may initially seem like a sacrifice for the host community, an act of generosity without immediate reward, but over time, the effects of that welcome ripple outward, enriching the community in unexpected ways. Take Canada's refugee sponsorship program, where private citizens and organizations commit to supporting refugees as they resettle. At first glance, this might seem like a one-sided act of charity, but the results tell a different story. Refugees contribute to their communities, start businesses, and revitalize neighborhoods. Meanwhile, the sponsors themselves often describe the experience as transformative, deepening their sense of purpose and connection. When the host community embraces the migrant, the moral imperative not only strengthens their shared humanity, but also generates long-term benefits for all. Conversely, rejecting the migrant may preserve short-term resources but creates division, fear, and missed opportunities for mutual growth. Think about policies that create space for migrants to contribute, like work permits and education access. These measures aren't just acts of charity, they're investments in a thriving, interconnected society. And for individuals, the ripple effect of love might start with something as simple as mentoring a new neighbor or supporting local immigrant-owned businesses. Challenges and opportunities, the moral test of immigration. Finally, let's confront the challenges head-on. Immigration is complex, and it's natural for host communities to wrestle with fears and tensions. Resources can feel stretched, cultures may clash, but Jesus' teachings don't dismiss these concerns. They ask us to rise above them. In Matthew 5:43-44, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." This radical love is not blind, it's courageous. It acknowledges fear but refuses to let fear dictate our actions. In the context of immigration, this means resisting policies and narratives that dehumanize migrants or frame them as threats. It means choosing compassion over convenience, justice over prejudice. The rhetoric surrounding immigration often plays on fear. Politicians warn of job losses or cultural erosion, stoking division instead of addressing real concerns. Yet we've seen communities defy this narrative, towns that have embraced refugees and reaped the rewards of diversity, resilience, and innovation. Places like Lewiston, Maine, where Somali immigrants have revitalized the local economy, show us that immigration isn't a zero-sum game. For governments, this means crafting policies that address legitimate concerns, like economic stability and public safety, without resorting to exclusion or fear-mongering. For communities, it means engaging in dialogue, building trust, and finding common ground. And for us as individuals, it means refusing to turn away from the least of these, even when it's difficult. It means choosing love, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Let's pause here. Together we've explored coexistence, action, responsibility, the ripple effect of love, and the moral challenges of immigration. Each of these teachings invites us to see migrants not as others, but as reflections of Christ himself. And as we move toward the conclusion, we'll ask, how can we put these insights into practice to build a more just and compassionate world? Let's return to where we began, with the image of a family at the gates seeking refuge. The question isn't just what policy should say, but what love demands. And love, as Jesus taught, is never passive. It's never constrained by fear or convenience. Love acts. Love sacrifices. Love transforms. Jesus said, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." This command isn't easy. It calls us to love not just those who look like us, think like us, or share our space comfortably. It calls us to love the stranger, the outsider, and even those we might fear. When we welcome the migrant, we are welcoming Christ himself. When we meet their needs, we are living out his gospel. And when we choose compassion over fear, we are not just helping others. We are becoming the people God created us to be. Let me leave you with these words from Jesus in Matthew 7:24-25. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Building a just and compassionate world isn't easy. There will be storms, difficult decisions, tensions, and fears. But if we build our actions on the foundation of Jesus' teachings, they will endure. They will not fall. So let us hear his words and put them into practice. Let us welcome the stranger, love one another, and live lives that bear witness to the transformative power of his love. But you may have a different perspective, and I look forward to hearing about it in the comments. Please don't forget to subscribe and visit us again for more insights. Until then, may we be as one family, bound by our love and shared humanity.